Why would I never emigrate? I'm currently in Germany, and once again I've been asked, why don't you actually emigrate? I will definitely never emigrate from Germany, simply because I was raised and educated for the German system. On top of that, I haven't found any other country where you can earn so much money so easily and pay so little for high quality food as you can in Germany. You also have to keep in mind, of course, that there's the major issue of getting a work permit. Often you get a residencia, a residence permit in another country, but you have to be self-employed. The question is, do you have the experience? Do you have the startup capital? Do you even want that? If you want to take up an employed position, it's of course much more difficult to emigrate than if you're self-employed. If you say, great, I already earn my money online on my laptop anyway, that's certainly a good starting point. But in any case, you should definitely deal with the topic of taxes. In other words, where and how is your money taxed? How does it work with bank accounts? Can you simply receive money in your country? Maybe you can keep a German bank account and transfer money back and forth. These are things that definitely need to be clarified in advance. Often it's also the case that countries say, okay, you can live here, but you're not allowed to work here, at least not as an employee. In other words, you have to set up your own company and you might even be required to have employees, and this combination is tied to your right to stay. So if you fail in business, your residency status is immediately at risk. And that's the kind of stress I don't want to deal with long term. Do you own any real estate? Do you want to finance yourself through rental income? Certainly a good starting point, but you need someone on site whom you can trust and who will represent your interests. You don't want to have to travel 10,000 kilometers just for a tenant change after all. If you really are abroad, you also have to be able to deal with the society and the local cultural circumstances there. What often annoys me is simply that people are less punctual than we Germans are. You agree on something and, well, courts abroad also tend to rule more often in favor of their own citizens. This means that if you're involved in a traffic accident, which, by the way, can happen to you even as a simple tourist, you should assume that you'll probably lose in court. Furthermore, when it comes to business matters, for example, if you open a restaurant and your neighbor doesn't like the fact that you're maybe doing better business than he is, or you just generally bother him, well, then you might find yourself facing inspections a bit more often, or the authorities might ask you for things they wouldn't require from locals. You can quickly fall victim to this kind of arbitrariness abroad. In Germany, I've never had any problems with authorities like the police, public order office, or food safety inspectors. Back at the beginning of the 2000s, I was actually one of the first in Germany to start selling edible insects for human consumption through an online shop. We had street food trucks and we also offered cooking classes. We very, very often had anonymous reports. Thanks for that, by the way, from people who apparently weren't happy with our business model, but we were always able to work well with the authorities. They often gave us valuable tips as well. And I never had any problems with the tax office either. I did have disagreements with them from time to time, but then I picked up the phone and the people on the other end were also willing to talk with me. Some of those conversations lasted 2 hours, but by the end we had clarified our positions and found a solution. Abroad, I think such conversations are more difficult simply because you're not a native speaker. If you're talented with languages and say, I can speak the language, that's good, but can you really understand the dialects as well? Often it's the case that people understand you, but you don't understand the locals. Learning the language is absolutely essential. I often visit Germans living abroad. They've lived abroad for 30, 40 years and still don't speak the local language. I don't just think that's absurd, because it makes life unnecessarily difficult for yourself. But it's also completely disrespectful to your host country and its people, because mastering the language of a country is, in my view, the bare minimum if you really want to integrate culturally. If things go really well for you, you might even fall in love. You want to get married, you want to start a family. In Thailand, for example, I learned that if you fall in love and you want your wife to move in with you, you have to pay her family money every month. No, not because they're selling or renting the woman to you. No, the thing is simply that the woman's income from her job is essential for the family's planning. It's needed for survival. And if you say, I don't want my wife to work, I want my wife to move in with me and start a family with me, well, then the family still has to make ends meet somehow. And the money that's missing has to be provided by you. By the way, 98% of my viewers watch my videos without subscribing. That's really a shame, because I put a lot of time into these videos and my subscription is free. So please leave a subscription now, or at least a like. Thank you. Buying real estate abroad. I think no topic is as complicated as this one. Really get legal advice if you're planning anything like that. I know stories from Costa Rica, for example, where a plot of land was sold to two people, and that's actually possible there. Apparently, they don't have a land registry there like we do in Germany. And the whole village knew that this plot had been sold to two people. They were just there as tourists, always on their property, building or changing something. And when the other one came, he wondered, what happened to my property here? He changed everything back, and when the other one returned, it had already been changed again. This whole game went on for years until the two buyers actually met at the same time, and that's when the fraud was finally uncovered. When you watch my videos, for example, the one where I was alone in the rainforest at night, I'll put a link to it at the end of this video, you don't really notice how hot it is and what the humidity is like there. The climate in Europe is quite pleasant, especially here in Germany. Can you really handle it health-wise, that it's always hot and humid? It's so humid that if you have vinyl records or books, and by the way, this also applies to CDs and DVDs at some point, they start to get moldy in the grooves. Thankfully, that's something we don't experience at all with our climate. And I also know people, especially older ones, who have breathing problems, and eventually they move back to Germany because they say you simply live a few years longer here. Insects are always around everywhere, even in your house. They can be tiny, cute ants, but they can also be cockroaches and those lovely geckos you see everywhere. When you're at a hotel, they're nice to look at for tourists. They're not really a problem at first, but gecko droppings attract cockroaches. Masonry buildings with proper windows are also very rare abroad, simply because they're not needed since it's always hot. And that also has a big downside, it's always noisy. You hear the neighbors' music, you hear the birds in the morning, you might even hear howler monkeys. These are all sounds that start around 4:30 or 5 in the morning. That's quite nice when you're on vacation, but if you have to get up at 6 to work 10 hours, you have to deal with it. Take a look at your insurance. Often when you go abroad, you need private health insurance. You will often get statutory health insurance in your host country, and you will probably have to become a mandatory member there. However, they don't offer the same benefits as in Germany, especially for serious illnesses like cancer, which are of course also very expensive to treat. You won't get the same coverage as with our statutory health insurance. That's why I definitely recommend that you take out a private policy here. And of course, that immediately costs a few €100 per month. Do you have that kind of money? Also, take a look at your liability insurance. Most of them are no longer valid if you stay abroad regularly or no longer have a residence in Germany. Pensions, the favorite topic of Germans. All I can say is, if you don't have any pension entitlements yet, do everything you can to make sure you have some money in old age to pay for your food and accommodation. I've often seen it differently with adventurous people. They only realize when they're older that they made some mistakes in their life planning. When the time comes, or maybe you've already earned your pension entitlements and you're moving abroad, make sure you figure out how the money will reach you. There are often problems with the transfers. Nowadays, I believe the German pension fund even wants to charge a fee if they transfer the money abroad. And you regularly need to provide proof that you're still alive. That means your pension isn't just transferred to you blindly on the assumption that you're still alive. Instead, you now have to regularly provide proof that you are in fact still alive, so that the pension actually reaches you and not, for example, your heirs. This proof of life can sometimes be a bit of a hassle. You often have to go to government offices, maybe even to the German embassy, and well, you basically say, hello, I'm still alive. And hopefully you have a valid ID with you to prove IT only, then will your pension payments continue. Those are the reasons that immediately came to mind for me as to why I would never emigrate, even though, as you all know, I absolutely love to travel. But Germany really isn't as bad as people might think. And what it's like to be alone in the rainforest at night, I explain in that video.